In investment banking circles, it's the biggest gig in town, and this week the Treasury is expected to announce who's landed the role of advising on the sale of state-owned assets. For the inside word on who's in the running, I'm joined by Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. Good morning, Gareth.
Good morning.
So, who are we looking at here?
Well, what we're hearing is that this is the first of 3 or 4 roles that Treasury is going to hire advisors for, and this is for preliminary work ahead of the election. And we're hearing that Cameron Partners and Deutsche Bank seem to have this sewn up. There's an announcement expected in the next day or two. Of course, Cameron Partners, founded by Rob Cameron, formerly of Fay Rich White, who had a significant role in the privatisation and float of telecom way back in 1989 and 90. And Deutsche Bank recently had a role in the IPO of General Motors in the US.
When it comes to the actual float, this is going to be quite a lucrative role to hold, isn't it?
It is. I mean, this is, as you said, the biggest gig in the investment banking world in New Zealand right now. From what we heard, pretty much all the major local players put their hand in the ring for this particular role, plus some overseas players such as Merrill Lynch teaming up with Forsyth Barr to put their hand up for the role as well. So it's certainly a role that's well sought after. And I mean, if you're talking about $5 to $7 billion worth of asset sales, if you look at fees based on 1 to 2% of that, it's a lot of fees.
It sure is. Now, you've been taking a look at the logic of some of our small regional banking players forming a tie-up. What sort of pressure is there for them to get together?
Look, I mean, times are pretty tough out there. Obviously, after the global financial crisis, the cost of the money that the banks borrow and then on-lend to their customers has gone up. There's much greater competition for their key retail deposit funding from the big Australian-owned banks, thanks to the new Reserve Bank liquidity or funding measures. And also the lending growth, as we know, is very weak, if there's any at all. So things are pretty tough. Their margins are under pressure. And it just seems to me to make a lot of sense. I mean, we're talking about sort of your TSBs, your SBSs, PSIS. I mean, these are either community-owned or they're mutuals or cooperatives. So they're based around, they're owned by their customers or their communities. So they have very similar strategies. And they're all competing against, you know, these great big Australian-owned banks plus Kiwi Bank, which is backed by the taxpayer. So it just seems logical to me that it would make sense for them because scale is really the name of the game in banking now. Is
there appetite among them for a tie-up of that kind?
Well, certainly SBS, last year they took over HBS, the Hastings Building Society. They've talked about wanting to create a national community-focused bank, so they're certainly interested in doing it. TSB doesn't seem on the surface to be that keen, nor does PSIS, but you just have to think if times continue to be tough and perhaps even get tougher, that their hand could be forced.
And staying with the big banks, ANZ rolling out its global brand campaign here. What's the significance of that?
Well, look, this is sort of interesting because they tout themselves now as a super regional bank under Group CEO Mike Smith, who's formerly of HSBC. They're very Asian-focused. And they've got Simon Baker, the Australian actor from The Mentalist, and they've launched this campaign in Australia and Asia. They plan to bring it to New Zealand later in the year as well. They're currently reviewing their use of the National Bank brand here in New Zealand. So you just wonder if it's a pointer to where they're heading and what that might mean for the National Bank.
Indeed. Thank you, Gareth. That's Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz.